This is Oral Rehab Lecture 8, Part 4. Looks like there's going to be a Part 5. So let's just work through Part 4 first. We resume here in Part 4 at slide 25. All right, so in addition to those features of the digital processor that are important, there are some other things in hearing aids and amplification systems that are important to consider. These might be considered really more optional features, or these are things that would sort of need to get requested, or somebody has to think to have these things added in. And we'll talk about them in a little bit more as we go through. But some of the things that are very nice features of contemporary systems, particularly hearing aids. Something called the directional microphone. The directional microphone doesn't exactly do what you may think. It doesn't enable you exactly to tell where sounds are coming from any better. But what it does is it excludes certain directions from amplification, and by extension, what that then does is it enhances certain directions of pickup. What this has the net effect of doing is a very important type of technology, because what this has the net effect of doing is giving the intended signal a little bit more energy and reducing the energy that's being picked up at the microphones by a little bit, so that it has the net effect of enhancing the intended signal by sort of reducing the background signal by just simply not pointing the microphone at it. It does something, other things sort of electronically that enhance that. But that's called a directional microphone. And as we'll see when we talk about, or as you read the articles, the directional microphone is one of the more highly recommended aspects relative to what an option or feature in a hearing aid should be. Same thing might be effectively done by having a multiple microphone array where you have multiple microphones pointing in different directions. This one maybe hasn't quite caught on as much as it might have. At some point, it'd be something that might simply be more feasible, but right now not as much. Two-aid synchronization. So if a person is wearing two hearing aids, the two aids basically are working together. They're sending signals back and forth across your head. So the hearing aids, in a sense, are talking to one another and are maximizing their performance depending on where the signal is located relative to the person wearing those hearing aids. That's kind of an interesting concept. More and more contemporary hearing aids are featured by their connectivity. So the connectivity aspects of hearing aids, and an example I have here, just simply Bluetooth, but the ability of the individual hearing aid user to use their hearing aids to connect to, television, telephone, to be able to hear other things in the environment, and have the hearing aid sort of switch between the pickups of those, again, as a feature that's becoming more and more popular, as you might expect. Data logging, since these are these hearing aids are computers after all. Now we can sort of keep a record of what the hearing aid is doing, and particularly if a person is using multiple memories, at what conditions are they using them. We can look at how many times did the hearing aids go into compression, sort of monitor whether or not the person's getting optimal amplification or not. So we can always ask the person, was the hearing aids ever too loud for you? And they could say, yes or no. We could actually ask them, have you been wearing the hearing aids? And how long do you wear them? And they say, well, I've been wearing them every day, 8 hours. And then you put them in the data log, and you put the hearing aid in the computer, and you sort of get a record of it, and you can see the person really hasn't been wearing them at all. So it's a way to kind of check on whether they're being truthful to you or not. Not the hearing aids, the user. So a couple of these overarching kind of comments here about, first of all, what I'm considering state-of-the-art statements in contemporary amplification. Number one, the product is very good and is getting better. Digital processors are now the standard. As I said to you before, hearing aids have never been better than they are. Cochlear implants have never been better than they are. So all of these devices are technologically as good as they have ever been. Hearing aids today can do things that I couldn't have imagined they could have done 30, 40 years ago. I've been involved in hearing aid fitting work for probably 35 years or so. And so, given all of that, it's going back all those years. They're doing some amazing things. Miniaturization has always been sort of a challenge. Hearing aids have always been a study in compromise between the engineering aspects versus the cosmetics, so that the issue of a hearing aid having the capacity to do many things in terms of its engineering always had to be offset by the cosmetics of it. America, as you may have noticed or maybe not, is a culture that really features youth and youthfulness, and so anything that appears to be indicative of aging or old is something that is not valued by American society. This is a societal issue. So the net result of that, as far as hearing aids has been concerned, is to basically try to conceal them, and the basic way to try to do that has been to miniaturize them. I'm going to jump ahead to the next slide just to show you sort of the latest and greatest. So here's a sort of a contemporary product called Lyric. Lyric is a insertable hearing aid which goes down deep into the canal, into the ear canal. This is a hearing aid that is not intended for the user to take in and out of their ear. This is a hearing aid that the hearing aid dispenser audiologist places into the ear canal and leaves there for 3 months or so until the battery inside of here dies. And then you see this little hook, so they go in and they just grab this and they pull the thing out, and they put another one back in. So in a sense, this is you could think of it as a disposable hearing aid. This still has a digital processor. It has a lot of those features that we had talked about a little bit ago. But one of the problems of really any hearing aid that has its important parts in the ear canal, this region of the ear canal, the outer third of the ear canal, where you see all this stuff out here, is, whoa, sorry. Here's where I was. Sorry for that. The outer ear canal out here has where the oil glands are that mix. The ear canal itself is lined with sweat glands. The ear canal in the outer third only has fat glands. And so the combination of the oil or the fat here and the sweat here forms cerumen, or a mix of a solution that kind of coats your ear canal. Well, that material in copious amounts, if that gets into the hearing aid, is going to foul it all up. And so one of the major problems with a product that's inserted deep into the field of the outer ear like this is that it could be potentially fouled by the natural debris that's in the ear canal. That's just a consequence of it. But nonetheless, the illustration here is just simply to show you that this is a product that it would not be visible to the eye because it's recessed into the ear canal. And again, is this popular? Yes, it seems to be. Why is it popular? Because it would seem to be uncomfortable. I don't know, to me. But yet it's popular because of the lack of visibility of it. Let me go back here. Another feature, or another sort of in my state-of-the-art comments here in contemporary amplification, has to do with the idea that 30 years ago, audiologists were prohibited from dispensing hearing aids for profit by the American Speech and Hearing Association. So the American Speech and Hearing Association, known as ASHA, based on their code of ethics, forbid audiologists from dispensing hearing aids for profit because they felt it was going to be a conflict of interest. This is not an insignificant point because in 1978, one of the there's two great years of hearing aid fitting that we need to be aware of, I suppose. One of them is 1978. 1978 was when an analogous professional group, a group of engineers, sued their professional organization, much like ASHA. They the premise is you got to kind of go with the analogy here. The engineers could do sort of the diagnostic work on a production project, but yet could not then bid for that project. And their professional organizations forbid them from doing it. Now, they felt that they should be able to do it. Again, much like audiologists and hearing aids were forbidden by ASHA to dispense hearing aids. They thought it would be a conflict of interest. This case by these engineers went to the Supreme Court of the United States. Supreme Court sided with the engineers, not with the professional association, and said, of course you should be able to do both things. And so based on that, then audiologists, the code of ethics of ASHA had to sort of give way to the law of the United States. And at that point, then audiologists could then dispense hearing aids for profit. Prior to 1978, the only audiologists who really were dispensing hearing aids were likely in the Veterans Administration. Audiologists simply didn't do it. Audiologists were much more involved in the diagnostic side of the diagnostic side of working with persons with hearing loss, and so that generation of audiologists that were sort of going through this and were sort of forbidden from fitting hearing aids were really prevented from having one of the best experiences you can have as an audiologist, which is putting a hearing aid on somebody, flipping the switch of that hearing aid, and in one flip of a switch, having the person's treatment and having the likelihood that they're going to function much better now with the flip of a switch is to miss out on that experience. And those audiologists really never got over it. And in fact, they broke away from ASHA and formed what's called the American Academy of Audiology, or AAA, largely out of anger, out of being treated so poorly by ASHA. So once upon a time, very few audiologists fit hearing aids. Now, approximately 50% of everyone fitting hearing aids in this period of over 50, not quite 30 years or so, half of all hearing aid dispensing professionals are audiologists. By the way, this presumes that there is now, approximately 50% are not audiologists. And in the state of California, there is a distinct license for hearing aid dispensers for which you do not need to be an audiologist. In fact, you don't even need a college degree. You don't even need a college course. You need to take and pass the state written exam, the state practical exam, much like audiology and speech pathology, have somebody kind of supervise you through those processes. And then you're a licensed hearing aid dispenser. You have to abide all the laws of hearing aid dispensing that have been put forth. And let me get to one last one here. So as Lyric we see again. One last state-of-the-art comment here has to do with this as follows. Most personal hearing aids are custom-fit devices, either in terms of how they're physically fit to the ear and also to their program, to how they're programmed, in terms of each hearing aid is custom set to maximize and to match the individual's hearing loss and loudness tolerance contours. This customization makes hearing aid dispensing a very unique retail item in the sense that even a hearing aid that's fit for similar audiograms may not be optimal for the 5 users who have a very similar audiogram. The characteristics of that hearing aid and features and options and other things might not make it usable for everybody, for others. So the customization is certainly an interesting part of it. It also gets back to that notion that we talked about earlier in the course of the heterogeneity. So again, the idea then is that one of the features here that is an important relationship is that because the population, we are so focused on the individual, it only makes sense then that the product we're going to fit on them is also going to be highly individualized. So at least that kind of is a nice ending to this part of the story, is that our awareness of individual needs we can accommodate with products that are fit on an individual basis. Okay, with that, we're going to go finally to part 5.